Building Bellingham, episode 3. Let's get rolling.
Let's do it.
Cool.
Woo!
All right.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Building Bellingham. I'm your host, Leo Cohen. I'm with the Cohen Group Northwest. And on our today's show, we have Dylan Langei with Umpqua Bank. He's the branch manager. He's a good friend of mine. The reason that, I wanted to have Dylan on the show is because there's a lot of things that him and I have in common as far as starting out in this industry, coming from a similar place in our lives where we came out of school, had no idea what to do, and also had kind of a legacy hanging over his head. And I was really curious to find out why he ended up transitioning into his own world and creating his own legacy, and a local soccer player as well. So we're excited to jump right into this episode and find out a little bit more about Dylan's life. Dylan, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, guys. This is cool. I don't think I've ever talked into a microphone before.
Yeah, awesome. Well, welcome. I'd love for you just to dive in and tell us a little bit more about you, about where you're from, where you started, and how you got here.
I was born in Santa Rosa, California. Me and my mom and dad moved to Orlando, Florida, which is where my mom's folks still live today. So I've been to Disney World about 15 times. After that, we moved to Bellingham, Washington. Actually, I was probably about 3 years old. At that point, my mom and dad actually split up, and my mom and I lived in Sun Valley. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us know Sun Valley. We lived in a little 800 square foot house, only had a wood stove for heat. I mean, it was pretty surreal, but it was cool. It was like a little fort, for a 3-year-old. So yeah, came to Bellingham, went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and college in Bellingham. So I went to Bellingham High School, and then I went to Western, did my undergrad there, and then I also did my grad degree at Western. So I got my MBA. So yeah, I'm a Bellingham native, I would say.
A Bellingham guy. And so, and this might be too early on in your life to really remember, because I remember my parents got divorced when I was 3. And so do you have any sort of memories of life before? Obviously that's really young, or life after, or life during that transition, or is it too early for you to remember that?
Really the only memories I have is that Sun Valley house. I remember that. If you've ever lived in Sun Valley or been in Sun Valley during the winter in Bellingham, when it snows, I mean, that place is an ice rink, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's a snowboard hill. It's basically Mount Baker. So I remember there was a big snowstorm. My mom didn't even really know how to use the wood stove. So a lot of times, I mean, we just cuddle up in blankets, it was some pretty cool memories. But my dad now, who, would be my stepdad, but, I consider him my dad. He came along right after that and, showed us how to use the wood burning fireplace.
Step one.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, I was definitely a mama's boy, and that kind of grew me up. I remember him telling me stories how, I didn't like my hands to get dirty because, I was raised by my mom, and it was like the first time that I got my hands dirty, I almost freaked out. So yeah, I have some memories, but I mean, they're all positive.
Yeah. All positive.
Yeah.
So, and what was that like for you growing up with 2 separate households? I know I can relate to that pretty directly, but what was that like for you at an early age? And when you look back on it now, how do you feel like these type of experiences growing up in a, separated household has shaped you to be who you are?
It's funny. I remember feeling pretty fortunate because I remember every year, so my dad eventually moved to, and I'll just say my real dad moved all the way to Chicago. So every year my grandma would fly into Seattle, on my real dad's side, would fly into Seattle, and I would get to go to Chicago every year. So as a young kid, I was like, that's sweet. I get to go on a trip every year. Then I have this awesome household, with these awesome loving parents here in Bellingham. It was great. 2 Christmases, 2 birthdays.
Yep.
Yeah.
Double up.
What's not to love?
I know all about the double up.
Yeah,
it's
it was
great.
awesome.
So for you had these 2 separate households. Give me some experiences that you had with, you said you had a warm, loving household at both places that you went. And some people don't have that, but you had, the blessing of having that. What was that like growing up? Was it an encouraging environment? What was that like for you as a kid?
It was crazy because they were 2 completely different households. So they were both loving and amazing, but just so my my mom and dad, I'll just say here in Bellingham, they worked at a credit union, which I'm sure we'll get into. They were in banking, very play soccer, go to school, very goal driven, very goal oriented. My real dad that was living in Chicago was a lot more, do what you love. If you want to play hockey, play hockey. If you want to play football, play football. My mom's like, you are not ever playing football, right? You're playing soccer.
Because
I don't want you to get hurt. Yep.
The head is your biggest asset there, right?
But yeah, it was more, my real dad's place in Chicago. And granted, I only went there once a year. I mean, I wasn't there all the time. I definitely was raised by my dad and mom here in Bellingham. But it was interesting just having both of those perspectives. And every time I went to Chicago, I would kind of come back with a new perspective. Like, maybe I don't need to do this, this, and this, which of course I did end up going to school and college and doing that. But it was just cool to kind of have that different perspective. So yeah, it was good.
So you would basically go, it's interesting because you would have one basically checkpoint a year where you'd have all these goals and have all these, I guess, ideas of what you needed to do and how you needed to set goals, which was, I think, probably a good upbringing for you, but then also being able to have that balance from your dad out in Chicago to say, but you should also be kind of questioning these things as well. Is that kind of your experience with that? That's
actually spot on. I've never heard it that way, but yeah, it was pretty much, I would go there and it would kind of open my eyes a little bit. Like we would make skateboards, longboards, right? We would rollerblade. We would do a lot of activities. We would bike. It was more artistic, more free, more, it's kind of hard to put a word on it, but my life in Bellingham was definitely a little more structured, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, it definitely grew me to who I am today, but it was cool seeing that different perspective once a year. My real dad's a DJ right
That's
now.
awesome.
And he's 51. So as you can tell, and then my mom and dad here in Bellingham, have worked in banking for 30 years. So from those two professions, you can see it was very different households, and it was really just finding the positives in both of those, I think was important.
Well, you look really at home with those headphones on right now. So
thank you. Yeah, I might spit a few beats.
Awesome. We'll cut to that a little bit later. So you made this transition early on. You moved to Sudden Valley. I mean, really, you are from Bellingham. I mean, you've lived in California, born there, very briefly, it sounds like. Yep. Moved to Orlando. Where's your family from?
Yeah, so my mom was actually born in Trinidad and Tobago, which pretty much no one has heard of. So she has the best way to put it is kind of like a Jamaican accent.
Yeah, amazing food.
So yeah, and great food, curries, all that kind of stuff. But it always throws people off when, they see me and then they meet her. And, I obviously don't have an accent. And she, to other people, has a very thick accent. And when she goes back home to Florida, I mean, it definitely thickens up. So it's pretty cool. So she's from Trinidad. My real dad, a lot of Irish background, but I don't really know my real dad's side of the family. So I only knew his mom, but she passed away pretty young-ish, and I never met his dad, so my real grandfather. But yeah, my mom's side, amazing, from Trinidad. It's a fun culture. They love their rum and drinking and eating good food. Yeah, it's really cool.
How does that culture play a role in who you are today?
Once again, it's interesting. They are, hardworking people. My grandfather still works to this day. He's 73-ish, I want to say. I don't know exactly. But he delivers basically these things called patties. So they're like beef, chicken inside, and it's kind of like a hard crusted bread on the outside, and coconut water all over basically middle to southern Florida. So he goes to these little convenience stores and with these big crates and delivers, all these Jamaican patties and coconut waters, and he still does that today. And my grandma just recently retired. So it's cool. They're really hardworking people in their own way. My mom ended up in banking. I don't know how, but they're hard workers. He had an insurance company. He started an insurance company in Trinidad, moved here, started doing that business. He actually played for the Trinidad national soccer team. They're cool people. They're fun to be around. No matter what age I am, when we go back there to Florida, it's a really cool experience.
You have a background in soccer and sports. Tell me a little bit more about where you started in the soccer world, where you are today. Like, tell me about that journey a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, soccer's always been a part of our family, and especially my mom's side of the family. I just think the structure and, the kids that you hang out with growing up because of soccer or sports, for that matter, it just it helps you get through school. It helps you get through, middle school, high school. If you have to change schools, you kind of know everybody in the community, and you're hanging out with the right kids. You're hanging out with the, more affluent kids, I would say, because these club soccer teams cost a lot of money. So it sets you up with the right friends, the right people. And yeah, I mean, I played from 5 or 6 to, I played a year in college. And I actually still play today for, the local team, Bellingham United. So I love it. It's always a challenge. It's a physical challenge. It's different than my working environment, which is a mental challenge. So I think it's good to balance those two.
I would completely agree. That's similar to my background.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about team sports and the mindset that it instills in us, especially at a younger age. Being on a team, having to support your teammates, having to recognize what your strengths are, what other people's strengths are. How do you feel that those experiences growing up in the soccer world have really translated into you as a professional today?
You start to understand how to understand people's strengths and weaknesses. And obviously you have different positions on the field, but, those positions are pretty much decided by your strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's important to learn, maybe as a younger kid, to share and to understand that, it's not just a solo sport and that you need other people to win and succeed, and also to lead too. It teaches you to become a leader, and you kind of just find your molding and you find your, team sports I think is super important growing up.
So you're basically saying you get to know what your strengths are. You really become aware of what other people's strengths are and why those are important to why your strength and their strength supplement each other. But then also, in my experience, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the other part is like really learning what your flaws are and learning how to appreciate those and supplement those with other people's strengths. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I would. And I think also to that point, you start to realize that people are depending on you. I think as a younger kid, not a lot of people depend on you, right? I mean, you're kind of growing up, your parents are taking care of you. In team sports, if you fail in your position, that could, be detrimental to the game. And I think having that sense of, I'm sure both me and you have lost a soccer game because of something we did.
Never.
Yeah. Absolute rocket goalkeeper.
Yeah.
So I think it's important just to realize that people do depend on you and have that sense of feeling when maybe you fail and maybe when you succeed, you scored the winning goal or you save the winning goal. I think that's an important lesson as well.
So tell me about an experience that you had, because we've all won and lost games. Tell me a little bit about maybe an experience that you had where you lost a really important event or game, and how did you end up dealing with that loss? What did you learn from it?
Yeah, so I still play on that team, Bellingham United, which is it's a local semi-pro team. We made it to the final this year. I mean, this was a few months ago. And, we lost 1-0, 90th minute. Goalie went up for a pretty standard save, slipped through his hands. Guy has been dynamite all year. Hasn't made one mistake. Happens to be in the 90th minute of the final. Hard-fought battle. We should have won the game. Drops an easy, going up for a save, drops it. We get scored on. We lost 1-0. And I think we had a good culture there in the team where it wasn't like we're pissed at him. We know how far he brought us. And of course, he was bummed out and, hard on himself. But I just think you go back to that culture that you've instilled in that team. If we didn't like each other and if the culture wasn't there, I think that could have been a very different feeling. But I felt like we played our hearts out. We got unlucky. It happens. So, yeah, that's the most recent one. It was tough, definitely.
Yep. But would you also agree that from that standpoint, losing can be one of the most powerful growth tools?
Yeah, it can be also motivating. So going to our indoor team and kind of on this soccer train that we're on, we had won 3 indoor titles for 3 straight years, went to nationals. We got 3rd place, we got 2nd place. We had never won the national tournament, but we had gotten really close. And last year was the first year, in 3 years that we didn't win the title, so we didn't go to nationals. And I think that we maybe got a little bit complacent because we had always won. And so I think now losing, we're going into indoor season, this year, in a month here. And I think we're a lot more realistic about we have to give it our all. We're not just, we can't just go out there, not train hard. We have to come prepared. So, and I think that's just like real life, soccer that translates into the working environment too.
So, okay. So the reason I like talking about soccer is because I think that team sports have so much influence on becoming a business owner or running a business or managing a business,
yep.
Or just how you conduct yourself in your daily life. And how do you feel like all of these events mixed in with this culture? You talked a little bit about culture. How have you used that idea of culture as a leader in the business community with Umpqua Bank in your current branch manager position? Creating a culture.
Yep.
You have to like the people you work with. It helps.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think to break it down, kind of what I do and what I do day to day will help people understand the answer to that question. So yes, I'm a branch manager of Umpqua Bank in the home lending division. So what I do day to day is, I also run my own book of business. So I originate home loans. So somebody comes to me, I look at their credit, I look at their income, I look at their assets, and I let them know basically what amount of mortgage we will lend them to buy a home. I had been doing that for the last 4 years. I just recently transitioned into the branch manager role in the last 2 months. So my role has now shifted from I'm not only a home loan officer, originating mortgages, I'm also managing 18 people. And this is 2 months in. So, it's definitely pretty fresh and new. But back to your point, I think that all the team sport philosophies and building that culture, it truly has filtered into what I do day to day, even before I was the manager. I think you don't need to be in a leadership role to build a culture and inspire people. And the title is, yes, it's important, but I don't think it's end all be all. I think you can still be inspiring. You can still build a culture without the title, without the manager position. And, now my job on paper is to retain, recruit, and build and maintain market share. But that's always been the goal for me before taking on that role, because kind of really the culture that my manager instilled in our branch, that it's not just one person leading the herd. It's everybody leading everybody and setting the right example and building a reputation.
Yeah, no, it's great insight. And I'm kind of curious, just so we can kind of explain to those that are listening, explain a little bit more just briefly about the home loan process. You'd thrown out some terms there,
yep.
But for people that are listening that are trying to figure out exactly what you do, you're basically taking somebody that comes either to a real estate professional or comes to you looking to purchase a home.
Right.
And based on them and their
I like
profile,
credit profile.
Credit profile.
Yeah.
They come to you and they say, here I am as a borrower. And first what you're doing is you're just running their credit, income, and assets, right?
Right.
And what that means, can you explain a little bit more about just briefly what that means?
Yeah. So what that means is, we pull a credit report. We base a lot of things based on that credit score, ability to repay the mortgage, things like that. Income, that's been a pretty eye-opening thing, for me to learn about, because as a kid or, a college student, you just think, well, everyone goes to work, gets paid. But people are paid in so many different ways. Some people are salary, hourly, commission, self-employed. So we really have to look into that. There's different guidelines depending on how you're paid. And then we look at your debts, and there's a calculation based on it's called the debt to income ratio. And so depending on your income and your debts, we qualify you for a certain monthly payment. And then your assets is for a down payment, something in funds in a checking account, savings account. And so, yeah, we really look at the whole credit profile. And essentially what I tell somebody is, you can afford a $300,000 mortgage. For this price, they go back to their real estate professional with their pre-approval in hand, and then they start shopping for homes.
Okay, so you're doing the super sexy side of the business.
Yeah. Everybody's excited to see
Everyone that's probably listening to this is getting so excited about home loans, the game of loans here. So this is the process. This is what you do on a kind of more micro level. This is your book of business, and by book of business, you mean you're working with realtors that you have a relationship with that, have someone that has said, they've raised their hand, say, I want to buy a house or refinance my house. They come to you, and that's just one part of your job. And by doing that and working till midnight every night and sending out emails to us at midnight, which this is not a joke. I get emails from Dylan sometimes at midnight, or get emails from you. Talk to me a little bit about leverage. I feel like you've been going through a transition while you've been transitioning into this branch manager role, and you being a person that likes to having control over your destiny, having control over what you're doing is, I think, paramount to you.
Yeah.
What has that transition been like into this role of culture and not really having as much control, or being okay with not having as much control over everything?
Right. Yeah, and we're kind of cutting ahead too, because I am, transitioning into a different role, as you alluded to, and have transitioned into a new role. And I just hired my first assistant, so I'm now starting to give away some responsibilities, which is new to me because, I started in this business 4 years ago. So basically, I finished up grad school, went to Europe for 3 months, spent all my money, came back. I didn't live in my parents' basement. I actually lived on the second floor. So,
penthouse.
Yeah, the classic 22-year-old with an MBA living with my parents and no job, interviewing at a multitude of different companies and industries. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was pretty eye-opening for me. I think that was a transformational moment where, I was highly educated on paper, I would say. I'm by no means the smartest person on the planet, but on paper, I had a very high educational level, and I was living with my parents at 22 with no job and no job offers because I had traveled Europe and I had like $5 to my name. So that was eye-opening. I had interviewed for, I want to say, 3 or 4 companies, some down south in Seattle, and I didn't get any job offers. And so it was a pretty scary moment, I think.
And so you went to Europe,
Yep.
And you went for how long again?
So I went for 3 months. So I finished grad school in June, and I went for the whole summer. And me and my buddy that were in grad school together, we lived out of backpacks. I think we lived on maybe $5,000 to do it all for 3 months. And people that know me, I don't really hike. I like the outdoors, but I'm by no means am I camping all the time. And so this was a stretch for me. I mean, I was living out of a backpack, 4 T-shirts. We were flying to a new country every 2 days. I was on the go. I like my home. I like my bed. I like my, things the way they are. So it was eye-opening. So I did that for 3 months and came back, and me and the same buddy, he actually had a job offer, and we had applied for the same job before we left. And I didn't get it. And they had multiple roles there, but I didn't get it, and he got one. So he knew he was coming back to a nice cush job as a consultant. There was an end time where, we were going to come back to Bellingham, and I was going to have to grow up. So
what do you mean by grow up?
Well, when you're in college, I think you have a false sense of being an adult. I think that you think because you're on your own and you have your own apartment and, you live by yourself and while you pay your electricity bill that you're an adult. But your parents are still there. If you need a home cooked meal, you can go there. Not that I can anymore, but you still have help and support. I think once you're out of college, you're kind of on your own. I mean, you got to get your real big boy or big girl job, and you got to support yourself, and you got to think about your future and, your future family and supporting them. So I think when you're in college, you think you're an adult, but you're still young and immature.
So you're basically an adult, but you have all of these props and all these, crutches that if anything goes wrong, you can run back. I mean, most
True.
kids might have the same experience, not every. So you had this perception of reality and this perception of money in college. How did that change when you got into your industry that you're in today?
Yeah, so I was, as I said before, I was interviewing for a bunch of places. I thought that I wanted to go in the startup community down in Seattle, work at a place with ping pong tables in the break room, kegs, all that fun stuff, because that's what all my friends were doing. And I ended up getting an interview at Umpqua Bank. So this was after multiple interviews, and I had a few banks/credit unions that I was interested in getting into real estate, but on the finance side. And so I had interviewed with 2 of them that I don't work at, and I had met the manager who now is still my manager. She's now the regional manager and a very close mentor. I had gotten connected with her through, small world friends of friends. So she's still my manager, and she was the branch manager at the time when I got hired on as a loan officer. And so I interviewed with her. Backstory, it was I wore my dad's suit, and my dad is like 100 pounds heavier than me. I wore his black suit, looked like a sushi waiter.
Nice.
It was Friday. I remember that. It was Seahawks Friday, and she was wearing jeans and a Seahawks shirt, and I'm wearing like this big puffy black suit and just looked super uncomfortable. And yeah, kind of the rest is history. We talked, hit it off. She thought it was awesome that I wore a stupid suit.
So prior to you getting in, you're going down to Seattle.
Yep.
You're interviewing at these places that you think that based on your experience, based on your education, based on your grit, all these things that you think that. How does that feel to have that self-confidence and that self-awareness and really be confident with who you are and what you have to offer, and have somebody tell you, I don't agree with you, I think this is not a good fit? What is that feeling? Tell me a little bit more about that.
When I think that feeling, what's hard about that feeling is that you never get a straightforward answer. So how do you build and improve and grow from that when, you put your blood, sweat, and tears on the line for this interview? I mean, we all know how long it takes to prepare for an interview, right? You're studying the company, you're buying some ridiculous suit or keeping the tag on the shirt so you can return it later. We prepare for that, and then, you think it goes well, but you kind of black out during it. Mm-hmm. And then you get the call that, you're just overqualified, or, you don't have enough experience. Things that you can't really change, right? So I think that's the hardest thing, is that it was I wouldn't use depression as a word for this, but it was definitely a hard pill for me to swallow, because I was ready to get into something and kind of give my heart to something and a company and really work my tail off for them. And I couldn't find anything. I mean, it was a few months, and I was doing manual labor I was milling logs, I was painting, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy a little manual labor, but that was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So it was hard. I mean, it's a hard pill to swallow when somebody denies you and you don't know why.
You have this background in banking. So your family has a background in banking, and you have this moment where you get put in touch with Demi Hartman, who's with Umpqua Bank, and who's the regional manager now. And you were thinking about getting into real estate at that point.
Right.
It was because I'm sure you're thinking about getting into a lot of things at that point. You're like, I can go down this way, I can go down.
I was going to get into dishwashing. I didn't care at that point.
Yeah. And so tell me about that. So you had this background, you had a kind of a pivotal moment where you were either going to go into real estate, maybe, or how did this financial question come up?
So, and backstory for this as well. So my grandfather started WECU, so Whatcom Educational Credit Union, 50 some odd years ago. And, he built it to over $1 billion in assets. I mean, a pretty phenomenal thing that he did, phenomenal company. So I had that background in banking. I had worked there, through college. Both my parents worked there. My mom still works there as well. And my dad has since opened up his own business. But I had the option to go to WECU, and I thought that would be a great starting point. My dad was kind of talking about getting into the mortgage side of real estate, because I really, I had interviewed to become a real estate agent, but I really like my weekends. I really like that time. So I was talking with my dad a lot during that time that I was living at his house. And he was like, hey, you could start at WECU, you could learn there, you could kind of learn the business, learn the mortgage process, because granted, I had never bought a home. I had never done a mortgage. I didn't really have any mortgage experience. But it's a different model over at WECU. It's more inside sales. It's more walk-in clients, and you're processing loans. And then I remember my mom, because my mom was in marketing at WECU, I remember her saying, man, there's this company, Umpqua, and they're up and coming. They're cool. I love their marketing. I love their logo. She's like, you should see what they're about. And I had no contacts there. But then I remember on LinkedIn, a gal named Claudia, who's still a loan officer there today, I saw that she had her 1-year anniversary there on LinkedIn. So I I said, hey, I'm looking to get into mortgage. I just got back from Europe. I have my MBA. I did my undergrad. I have no mortgage experience, but, I'm ready to do something. I'll start from the bottom. I'll do whatever. And she goes, crazy timing. I'd love you to meet my manager. We're looking to hire a loan officer. And at that time, I was interviewing with another local institution who didn't want anything to do with me. And so, I went into that Umpqua interview, which, we just talked about. Really, it was my last resort. It was my last option. I shouldn't say last resort. It was my last option because that other institution hadn't worked out. WeCoo could be a fallback plan, but I also didn't want people to think I was getting handed a job. I wanted to do it on my own. Not that I would be handed the WeCoo job, but my parents worked there. My grandfather was the CEO. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create my own name and do my own thing. But that's what I did. And I met with Demi. We really kicked it off. And it was a different model over there. And it was actually lucky that I was 22 living at my parents' because I could take a risk. I didn't have a family. I didn't have kids that, wouldn't eat if I didn't get paid. And at Umpqua, it's 100% commission. If you don't close any loans or, do any business, then you don't get paid. So, and WeCoo is a different model where, you get an hourly or salary. It was more of, like I said, the inside sales. Umpqua was more of the outside sales. Go get your own business. So
what does that feel like we've both worked salary jobs. We've both worked positions where it was hourly, and then now we're in a completely commission-based role. For people that are listening, I think there's a lot of fear of commission because it takes time to get it rolling, right? Mm-hmm. What was that like for you? I know that you had that opportunity because, you're living at home, you don't have, anybody that you're supporting, but at the same time, there still is the same just at a different magnitude on the scale there, you're still having that same fear of what happens if you don't show up, and it doesn't fit for everybody.
Right.
And it fit for you. And tell me more about why did that gel with you, that model?
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm trying to bring myself back 4 years to when I started and jumping in. And luckily I had a support system with, my folks that, I could always, and at that point I had moved out into my own apartment once I got the job at Umpqua. But I knew that, hey, if the odd chance that I completely flop and fail, I can always go back to that safety net. I didn't want to, but it enabled me to take the risk, and I'm glad I did. But that first year, even 2 years, that was hard. I mean, you're constantly grinding. I call it serial dating in my profession because what I have to do is, especially earlier on, was I have to convince somebody, let's say you, Leo, the real estate agent, you already have, your go-to lender. And we'll say that's your girlfriend, your wife, whatever. I have to convince you that I'm a better girlfriend or a better wife, but I'm this brand new loan officer, no experience. How do I do that? Right? So it's all relationship building. It's us getting along, having a beer, going to coffee. And so it's a slow burn. I mean, it's a snowball effect though. Once things start rolling and you get those contacts, whether it's a financial planner, a real estate agent, an accountant, you really start seeing it come to fruition. And it's really rewarding. And that's what I love about our office is there's no animosity amongst people that work there because we all built our own book of business from scratch. And, if somebody's having a rock star month, that they kicked butt, and they brought in all that business. It wasn't handed to us. It wasn't handed to them. And that's different than some other work cultures that I've been in.
So book of business meaning, and for you, for us, and I'm doing air quotes again, book of business would be clients that we're working with, right?
Yep.
And for you, your clients could be past clients that you've done a loan for that come back to you for a refinance on their house to pull money out, or the other part of your book of business is realtors, right?
Yep.
So is that how you would define what?
Yeah, I would say my book of business is the business partners and the actual clients because I get the clients from the business partners, the referral partners, however you want to coin that. But they're just as important as, the business partners are just as important as the clients, and the clients are just as important as the business partners. And I think it's important to remember that because you have to spend equal time. And that's the hard thing is balancing your pipeline for that month, but also maintaining those relationships with the business partners. So it's a constant balance that a lot of loan officers, and I definitely still struggle with it, because you get super busy because you've been working really hard on your sphere and your business partners, that you get so bogged down that month that you just don't go out and network and meet new business partners or realtors or financial planners. So that's the hard thing, is balancing those.
So, okay, so there's 2 steps to this. You're, first of all, starting out, you're trying to open the door.
Right.
And once you've opened the door, or the other lender, for whatever reason, is not available or whatever it is, and they say, hey, I need this done like right away, you kind of have to like almost go
drop everything,
go above and beyond, and just like, not that you wouldn't already do that, but in those moments you have to say, I have to perform. This is my moment. You have a lot of these moments starting out, don't you?
Yep.
Tell me more about those moments when you're like, I have to jump right on this. I have to do this like now.
Oh, I worked 7 days a week. I was the first one in the office and the last one, even though I had the least amount of business, right? There's always something you can work on to get better and be better, so that when I met with those business partners that I was trying to win over, I wanted to know the mortgage products, because unfortunately there's some laziness in our business, and I saw that right away and I pounced on it. Just being there as a second option. Hey, yeah, just like you said, your guy's not answering or your gal's not answering 7 p.m. on a Saturday, you call me. I'll do it, right?
Not forever, but for now.
Not forever, yeah. I still sometimes do it.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the business. You can't have the best of both worlds, right? We have the flexibility in the schedule and the flexibility of the pay that, we have to work nights. We have to work at 6 a.m. We have to, work on weekends. It's just, you got to give a little to get a lot. So,
okay. So this book of business, you've built this book of business, you're building this book, you're maintaining this. How big of a factor do you feel that authenticity plays into this? And how has that changed from because you're talking about not original Dylan, but like newbie Dylan starting out in the business, you're like, I will work with anybody. And now you've gone through enough experiences where you're saying, well, this is not me. This is not me. This is not a good fit for me. This is not it's a two-way street.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about authenticity and how that plays into building a really solid pipeline, and how that plays into building a really solid book of business.
Yep. Well, I think we all in our hearts want to be authentic. We all know who we are better than anyone else. I think, the world today pulls us in multiple directions, whether that's social media or what your parents think you should be doing or whatnot. I think we all want to be authentic down to our core. It is hard. A lot of us have to be chameleons, and, you're in a certain environment. You can't act the way. I don't act the same way at work that I do when I'm with my best guy friends, right? You have to change who you are sometimes, but I think we all want to be authentic to our core. Like me at work, I have the same personality. Maybe I'm not as boisterous as I am when I'm hanging out with my guy friends, having a beer, but I think it's important because you're going to attract the people that you want, and that, if you're portraying, you're wearing the full suit and buying the fancy car and being a prick, you're going to attract people like that in your life and clients like that in your life. If that's what you want, great. And if that's who you are, then that's authentic to you. But I'm against putting that act on just to build a book of business that's not real to me, or build any. I think people get desperate to build any sort of book of business, or, I see the most successful salesman does this, has a Ferrari, and, dresses in this suit, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah. And so what are some things that you do on a daily basis to remind yourself of who you are and to keep you grounded throughout the day? Because again, we're meeting with lots of people, we're interacting with lots of people, and you sometimes do have to not be your personal, like the core of who you are.
Yep.
You're still your core, you still have your same values, you still act a certain way, but when I'm meeting with a developer versus meeting with, some friends we're grabbing beers to talk about buying a house.
Right.
I'm not as proper in the way I talk. I mean, there's just more to that. But how do you do that on a daily basis? How do you remind yourself of who you are?
Well, it's hard because, now I have this manager hat on where I am more in the spotlight than I was before. Before I was just a loan officer doing my own book of business. There it is again.
Ding, ding, ding,
but
ding.
now I'm having to inspire, having to lead, having to manage, having to recruit, retain. I am more in the spotlight now. So I think it's even more important for me to stay true to that culture that we're trying to build and maintain, within our office. And I think it comes naturally. I think you can't force it. You can't make it happen. I think if you surround yourself with the right people, you guys will build an identity together. And I think that's important to have an identity at work. And then it's okay to have a different identity at home with your spouse or your partner or, whatever that may be. I think those two should coexist. I think this work-life balance is kind of bogus. I think that I enjoy my work so much that it trickles into my personal life. And I talk about buying homes. And, my friends want to talk about it with me. And I think and I want to talk about their jobs. And, if you have a partner or a spouse, I think you should want to talk about his or hers. So I think those need to coexist, but it's okay to have different identities inside and out. And I think having hobbies has been huge for me as well. And I know you're a big...
What do you do?
Well, back to soccer. I got back into soccer. So I played, as I said, first year in college. And then I hadn't played for... it must have been 6 or 8 years. And I got back into it. And it's nice because I'm surrounded by different people in my soccer world than I am at work, and this is a soccer team that has 18-year-old high school kids to 32-year-old, men that are in the working world, but in a completely different profession than me. So it's good to have those two different environments, and I'm still the same person to my core, and I'll talk about business sometimes at soccer, I don't think it's a bad thing, and I'll talk about soccer at work, and I think it's good to have those two different worlds and have those hobbies so that you're not just working, because that's what I was doing for the first few years.
Yeah, that's a conversation that we've had a lot.
We have
lately. So if you're not grounded in who you are, you're not authentically who you are at the core. I mean, obviously it varies a little bit as you have to chameleon your way through the world.
Yeah.
However, if you're not authentically who you are and you're not continually reminding yourself about that and you're not making sure you recharge, do you feel like you can show up at your office and be the best version of yourself?
I definitely think that I was hitting a point where I was working too much and getting burnt out, and I remember somebody asking me, what do you do outside of work? Go home and sleep? I didn't have an answer because I was building, and those first 2 years are a grind. But I think you lose a little sense of your identity when you just work and you just focused on work and you just go home and watch Netflix and go to bed. So I think that was a huge shift for me, and this happened 2 years ago where I started playing soccer again at a very competitive level. And it was interesting because my first year, I didn't start. I sat on the bench. I mean, I was spending hours training, hours going to games, traveling, and I didn't play. That was the first time in my life I didn't start. And it was pretty eye-opening, but it was a new challenge, and I always want to be on that learning curve. I always want to challenge. I think when I start plateauing on that learning curve, that's when I get complacent and I get bored and I slack.
Interesting. So you're saying the fire beneath growth has to do with either being uncomfortable or failing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think failing comfortably and being okay with it, it's still gonna bug you, right? When I didn't play, it still bugged me, right? You still think, I'm better than this guy, or even in the working world, I'm better than this person. I should have a bigger book of business. But it's a good fire. At least I enjoy it. That's a fire to me that inspires me and makes me want to be better. Once I'm plateauing on that learning curve, or I'm the best, or in my mind the best, then I start to feel myself start to slack. So I think it's important to constantly remind yourself and throw challenges in front of you so you can constantly grow and keep growing. And
so what does that look like? I mean, when you have those moments throughout the day, whether it's a business experience, so you're in a business setting and you're about to walk into a meeting where you're talking in front of a bunch of people, or if public speaking is not your thing, or on a personal level, you're talking to somebody that you've never talked to before. I don't see those as being your discomfort zone,
right.
But when you have these opportunities to step into discomfort, I know we've talked about this in our group.
Yeah.
what is that like? What does that conversation in your head sound like? And can you give me an example recently, like personal or business, where you saw discomfort, kind of freaked out a little bit, and then said, and fill in the blank.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think we all know when we're going to be uncomfortable. There's not a lot of situations that we get into and are like, wow, that made me feel super uncomfortable and that was very unexpected, right? I think we all kind of play it through our head. Then we start to get that anxiety and we get nervous. My kind of how I counteract that is really preparation. Public speaking was a huge fear of mine. And I know in college, what I would do is I would go into an empty room and I would do my presentation in an empty room because I'm like, this is a lot more awkward than when I'm giving a presentation to people nodding and looking at me. And I knew my script. I knew what I was going to say and present. And that's always been my thing. I'm a very organized person, which, helps me prepare for those uncomfortable moments. And there's moments in my profession where we have to give bad news. We're dealing with people's biggest purchase of their life. They're moving their lives maybe across state, maybe next door. This is a big deal, and we get to handhold them through the beauty of home ownership, but things can go wrong and they do. And things get missed, right? I'm human. Every loan officer is human. Every real estate agent's human. You miss one signature or one click of a button, and it can actually ruin the loan, or it can ruin the process or the inspection or whatever it may be. That one vital mistake, that one miss is detrimental. And I think preparing for delivering that bad news, it's been hard for me. I mean, I've had to learn that through the years, but it's always not as bad as you play it off in your head. And I think remembering that is really important.
So you talk a lot about preparation. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So can you give me some specific examples of times in your life where you didn't prepare well and it freaked you out, and times that you maybe learned from those experiences, or maybe they were completely unrelated, where your preparation was like, it was just so dialed in the day before, 2 days before, to the point where you walked in there and it already happened really well in your head 1,000 times. Can you give me some examples of that?
I mean, with my new role 2 months ago, right, I stepped into this role of, managing people that were once, my loan officer coworkers. We were at an even playing field. Not that I'm higher than them, but now I'm, stepped into this role as I'm technically their boss. There wasn't a lot of preparation for that. My manager at the time had gotten promoted, and it was sooner than I had anticipated. That was kind of in my 10 to 15 year plan, and it ended up being my 4-year plan. And I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for that. I knew once it was announced that she was getting promoted, I knew that position was going to open, and I just jumped right in. I put my name in the hat because I knew if I didn't, I might have to wait another 10 to 15 years for that position to open up. So I think you can't always be prepared, and I think it's good to not always be prepared. I got back to square one, get it, moving on my toes. I had to go back. I had to interview, right? I had 3 different interviews for that. I was back to that moment after college where I had gotten denied and denied and denied. And I kind of did have this thought in my head that if I don't get this position, I still work here. This is going to be a different level of denial than, okay, we don't want you to work at our company. Okay, later. That would have been, it would have been interesting. So I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare for that. It worked out, and I love it, and we have an awesome team and a great culture. And my goal is to just maintain that culture that my boss created.
So the culture at Umpqua, what does Umpqua stand for? What is your culture? What do you stand for? Yeah,
I think back to what I said earlier is that you spend more time with your coworkers than you do with your friends and your family. So you better like them. And that's really our culture down to the core. We love each other. We're a family. We work hard and we play even harder. And I think that's our culture, and I just want to maintain that, and I want to keep people happy. And we're in our busiest season right now ever. I think Umpqua is going to have one of its biggest months in history of Umpqua Bank for home lending, and we're all kind of freaking out, and we feel like our heads are cut off. But you got to just remind people of why they're here, what they're doing, why they're doing it. And, it's if you don't have that culture to lean back on, I think you can have problems with your employees.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you're in a position, it's very interesting because you're in a position now where on one side you have to produce numbers, like that is
Right.
your job. And on the other side, you also have to make sure that people are happy and enjoying the environment you're in.
Yep.
Have you had a recent, maybe in the first couple months that you can share where a recent experience where on one hand, you could either have the company benefit monetarily or the culture grow, and you made a decision, like, what are those decisions like? And like, how have you made those decisions that are driven by culture?
So what's interesting about my position is I am still a loan officer. So I'm still doing the day-to-day activities that all of my employees do, which is awesome because I'm fighting the same fight, right? I know exactly what they're talking about when they're complaining about, something that happened with a borrower or, our underwriters, which is basically people who approve our files, or, a business partner. I'm fighting the same fight. So I can connect with them really easily. But I'm also, I'm not necessarily a competitor, but we are, our own individual. I kind of say we're independent contractors. We work for this big umbrella, Umpqua Bank, right? And we all work in the office and do that. But we really have our own book of business. And there's a lot of times that, our business partners overlap or they change. And I think just, in my previous boss, and, I'm just trying to maintain this, is we all just understand that we want Umpqua Bank to be successful. So if it's not a right fit, if a client, is angry at me for some odd reason, I just, I'm happy to have them work with another loan officer at Umpqua Bank. I want them to be happy at Umpqua Bank, and we want our team to be successful. So we have tiffs in the office, but I think understanding to the core that we want Umpqua to be successful and every individual at Umpqua, I think we can fall back on that and get through anything.
So do you, at this point, attribute the majority of where you've landed right now in your position at an early age to hard work or to luck?
Yeah, so I think that people's individual circumstances create the luck and also creates that grit that you need to establish that hard work. I think that I was very fortunate with how I was raised and, the environment that I was raised in. My parents were very hardworking. My grandparents were very hardworking, from my grandfather who still delivers patties and coconut water to my grandfather that started Wiku. I think they're both unbelievably hardworking in their own way. And I think growing up in that culture and that, that kind of family, a loving family, created who I am today. And I had a bit of luck too, but I think there's a lot of hard work, and you got to take advantage of that luck when you see it.
I know you read a lot, you listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yep.
What one book has been the most influential in your life that you'd recommend to young people?
So I'm a big James Patterson fan, but that's not a business book. But I love those just to give my business mind a break. And I listen to a lot of podcasts just because I'm always on the go. I don't have a lot of time. Where I really read is when I go on vacation. Right now I'm reading Fierce Conversations.
It's a good book.
Because before I started in this role, I was telling my boss, I would say my one downfall is I have trouble having the tough conversations. And I think, I have now created a system I feel I need. Thinking through those before having a tough conversation has really helped me kind of break through that. And I'm a very systematized person, so I needed that, right? I needed that system I feel I need.
That's from Heather Simpson, isn't it?
It is, yeah, who you just had on.
It was just on the podcast here recently.
So that's helped me out a lot, honestly, break through some of those tough conversations in personal and business life. But I also love how I built this with Guy Raz from NPR. I mean, that's my inspiration.
To me too.
Yeah, he's awesome.
It's awesome. It's really good to hear other people's failures, and I think that's my big goal here on the show is bringing in people from all walks of life that have the ability to express their failures, what they do, and why they are so important in their growth. So, from everybody here, like we really appreciate you having you here. I appreciate you as a business partner, and thanks again for being on the show.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This has been an amazing experience. Thanks.
All right, everybody, that wraps up today's episode. Again, I'm your host, Leo Cohen with the Cohen Group Northwest. Today's guest was Dylan Langei, branch manager with Umpqua Bank. This episode was produced and edited by David Pender Lofgren. It was recorded and mixed by Andy Rick at Binary Studios. Our social media Jedi is Cooper Hansley. Our digital media producer is Tiffany Holden. Our theme music was written and performed by Aaron Guest. And our logo was designed by Sam Vogt. Building Bellingham is a proud member of the BellPod Network, a collective of independent podcasts made right here in the city of subdued excitement.